Hey everyone, I'm Mike Settele, and in this lesson, I'm going to go over the top 10 most overlooked SAT skills that you need for the exam. We all know the SAT is testing your algebra skills, your reading comprehension skills, your vocabulary, your grammar, but there's also these deeper skills that most people overlook. So let's look at 10 that I think are really, really important. And if your score is stalling, it might be because you need to develop some of these skills. You might have a weakness that you don't even realize. So number 10 here is pretty obvious. You need to have endurance. The test is long, 2.5 hours, plus all the logistical time of signing in and connecting to the Wi-Fi. You need to be able to stay focused through all of that and through the entire test. This is why practice tests are important. They help you practice your endurance. But it's also fully within your control to go to bed and eat breakfast, right? So make sure the night before the test, you're getting plenty of sleep. In my opinion, you need to go to bed early more than one day before the test, probably like the Wednesday before the test as well. And make sure you eat breakfast in the morning before your test, and make sure you have a snack for the break, because that fuel is going to help power your brain. So that is totally within your control. If you're someone who loses focus, check your sleep schedule. But also think about endurance in terms of the long haul of test prep, not just test day. You want to start prepping for your SAT about 2 to 3 months before you take it. So that means you've got to have a consistent study schedule that you stick to, that you endure through for a longer period of time to see the kind of score improvement that you want. Number 9, also not particularly surprising, you got to be able to keep your composure under pressure, right? You have to be steady and balanced. We call this sometimes nerve, right? As opposed to nervousness, which is something that is just unavoidable for an SAT. It's a big day, so it's understandable you'd be nervous. But I also want to say that composure is not the same thing as confidence. Confidence can be good, but can also be bad when we're overconfident. Sometimes it makes us fall into traps or make assumptions that we shouldn't make. So I really like to think of it as composure. That is when you are just able to deal with pressure and stay calm under pressure. And for those of you who suffer from test anxiety, this is actually a welcome way to think of it, because the test anxiety probably is never going to go away. I get nervous talking in front of crowds. I've been doing it for as long as I've been, since I was your age. I used to do Model UN in high school, and I get shaky and nervous and sweaty talking in front of those crowds at the Model UN conferences. And still to this day, no matter what I do, I still get nervous and shaky and sweaty before a crowd. But that's okay. It's just part of what that feeling is like. But doing it anyway, being able to stay composed and deliver that speech or take that test, that's an important skill that you can develop by not just doing SATs, but by doing all sorts of things that scare you. So you can develop that skill in lots of ways throughout your life. Number 8 is maybe the first one that's kind of surprising. You need to be skilled at risk-taking. A lot of people are very risk-averse. They're very cautious about things, and the SAT rewards risk-taking. So one example of that is you need to be a strategy optimist. So many times I teach my students these strategies, they learn them, they use them during the practice, but then come to the real test, they stop using them. They think, oh, I thought that I might be able to arithmetize. I might be able to plug points into equations, but I didn't try it. I thought it would fail. No, the strategies work. You have to have confidence in them, and you have to be optimistic that they'll work, because if you are afraid of failure, you will miss so many opportunities to make questions easier by thinking strategically or trying something. And that goes beyond just the strategies, really any question. There are so many times in the SAT where I'm working on a hard question and I have no idea what I'm doing. But I am confident enough, I'm willing to take a risk that I am able to start on step 1 of a problem without knowing step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5. I know I'll figure it out as I go. And so you've got to be able to take those risks. So many people are planners in a really bad way. They need to know every single step of what they're going to do to solve something before they actually start on step 1. If that's you, you will not succeed on the SAT. You got to be able to just dive into it. And at a certain point, you also need to be okay with placing a smart bet. You might not be able to solve everything, but you've probably learned enough and done enough in that particular problem that you can place a smart bet, take a risk on an answer choice, and move on. And so that's okay. You don't always need to be 100% confident in every answer. That's not going to be possible under the time limit, so you got to be able to move on. Now, number 7 is going to help with the pacing issues. Optimization is a very important skill for the SAT. We often think about this in terms of speed versus accuracy, right? If I move too fast, I might lose my accuracy. But if I worry too much about being right about everything, I go too slow and then I can't get to enough questions. Well, part of this is going to be solved by being able to make sacrifices, recognizing that there's a cost-benefit analysis you need to be doing constantly throughout the test. You're not going to be able to be perfectly accurate and super fast on everything. So a lot of it comes down to deciding, where am I going to put my time? Where am I going to put my effort? If there's a question that looks crazy, I might just guess randomly on it entirely and save the time and put it to use somewhere else. We are trying to optimize our way through this test. We're not looking for perfection. we're looking to get the most points possible. So sometimes if I'm looking at a 50-50 chance of getting something right, if I'm down to 2 answer choices, I might think, okay, if I spend an extra minute on this question, I might increase my chance to 90%. That minute might be worth it because now I'm pretty much guaranteeing that I would get that question right. But if I'm at 80% confidence and I realize, okay, I can spend another minute to get to 90%, that's not a good use of that minute. I'll take the 80%. That's good enough. And so you've got to be okay with that kind of decision making during the test. Some people really aren't. It's either 100% right or 0% right, and they're just got to think about it in those very black and white terms. But that's not going to be good enough. You've got to be able to think in that cost-benefit way throughout the test. Not only what questions I'm going to spend more time on, but also which strategies I'm going to use. Maybe a certain strategy is a little bit slower, but if it dramatically increases your chance of being accurate, dramatically increases your chance of avoiding trap answers, those extra few seconds on that strategy might be worth it. That's why I think strategically in a lot of questions. Then we get to something else that's also fairly commonplace, right? Memory. You have to have a good memory. You have to be skilled at memorizing in order to do well in the SAT. We've got rules and formulas and vocabulary words that we need to memorize. But there's also the deeper stuff, strategies, potential traps to watch out for, exceptions to all the rules. That's a lot to handle. And so some people just do not have a strong memory, and they're going to struggle to get all this stuff from this very comprehensive exam into their brain for one test day. But I also want to talk about what I call the whack-a-mole problem. I see this a lot with my students. One of the things that they struggle with is their way that they study for things in school isn't good for long-term retention. So I'll be working with a student and we'll take a practice test and they'll be bad at grammar. So we'll spend a lot of time working on grammar. It's like that arcade game, right? You have this big mallet and all these moles keep popping up all over the place. And so what do? A mole pops up over here, you whack the mole down, right? And then another mole pops up over here, you whack it down. And so I think of studying for the SAT in that way. And for some people, right, the grammar mole pops up and we do a lot of practice. We do really well. We whack it down. We take a practice test and they nail the grammar. They're really, really good at it. But then, okay, on that practice test, maybe another mole popped up, right? Now they're bad at quadratic equations. So we do a lot of studying on the quadratic equations. We learn about vertexes and all these formulas. And we whack that mole down. Then we take a practice test and look, they're great at quadratics. Now they got all those questions right. But the mole for grammar popped back up on the other side. And every time we try to whack a mole down, another one pops up, something that I thought we had dealt with. Some students have this real problem where every time we move from one topic to another, an old topic pops back up. They can't retain the memory of everything that they learned for that. And so we're constantly whacking down the same problems that have come up before. And it's a constant just struggle to get something to stick in their brains. A lot of you study for tests in school this way without realizing it. What happens is you do really well on the homeworks and the quizzes and you study really hard for this one particular topic, but as soon as the test on that topic is over, you push the delete button in your brain and it all goes away. And then you move on to the next topic and you study that and you do really well there and that's great. And then when that test is over and you got an A on that test, you hit the delete button and it's gone. And that works until you get to a test that covers lots of topics. And this is why a lot of people say they're bad test takers. In my opinion, the number one reason people are bad test takers is they push that delete button every time they move on from a topic. And so when something requires a bunch of topics like the SAT, they don't have the memory and they're not able to pull from lots of different places to solve questions. That is not a good way to study in school. It may get you good grades temporarily, but it is not good for the long term, and it certainly will not work on the SAT. So there are ways to develop your memory. I mean, I kind of did this accidentally as a kid. We would, memorize the state capitals or take spelling quizzes and memorize how to spell words, even just stupid things like memorizing all the Pokemon, right? Like there were only 150 at the time, but still, it's a pointless exercise, but it's developing your ability to memorize things. So you can practice this in lots of different ways. It might be trivial what you're memorizing, but you're developing that skill. So when you need to memorize something important, you have the ability to retain that information. But memory is not everything. You've got to do more than that. So a lot of people do really well in math in school because they can memorize all the steps that their teacher tells them to do for certain problems all the way up through AP calculus, but they never learn how to solve puzzles. And the SAT absolutely tests this skill. You need to be creative and clever and flexible because as much as the test is predictable, there are lots of topics that are just going to keep showing up again and again, lots of questions that we're going to see again and again. There's always stuff that's unpredictable. And for a lot of the students who are kind of stuck at that 1400 level and can't get to 1500, it's because they're not being creative. They're not being good at puzzle solving. And so that's because when they get something they've never seen before, they've never done any memorization for, right? They didn't memorize those particular steps. They're unable to solve that problem because there's no memory of it. But I promise you, I don't have a memory of it either. What I'm able to do is realize I've got certain tools, certain things I can reach for, certain things I can try, and I'm figuring it out in the moment. A lot of people have great grades in school, but not so great SAT scores. You might be bad at puzzle solving, and you can solve this. I've definitely improved this skill just by playing video games. Give me like a Zelda game where I've got a bunch of different weapons and tools, and I've got to get to the top of that tower. I don't know how I'm going to get there, but I know that some combination of those tools is going to get me there. So video games, as surprising as it is a great way to improve your puzzle solving ability. Now, number 4 is the hardest one for me to explain. You have to be skilled at filtering things, okay? You got to know which details matter. This is most obvious in these dense passages, right? And if you've seen me do any video explanations of these passages, you know that sometimes I'm able to pick out certain strong words that really matter, and I'm able to ignore others. But how do you know which strong words are important? How do you know why those particular words are the strong ones to pay attention to? How do you improve that skill of filtering out the details and finding the stuff that really is important? It may seem like magic when I do it. And again, I don't really have a good explanation. I'm sorry. I don't know how I learned how to do that. My guess is that it naturally is a skill that you develop as you enter into adulthood, because as an adult, you are just constantly bombarded with information. Everyone is trying to sell you something. They want your time, they want your money, they want your attention. You've got documents to read, forms to fill out. There's so much information and news and things to worry about, and it's overwhelming. And so you kind of naturally develop this skill of being able to filter out stuff and find the things that matter. Or at least I have. I don't know. Maybe some people are really floundering in all that information. But it is a skill that you develop as you get older. If anyone has any ideas on how to do it now when you guys are in high school, put them in the comments. But I think it is something that you are already starting to develop just by studying for the SAT, is learning how to understand the stuff that matters and the stuff that doesn't, and to be able to really use the stuff that matters to solve these kinds of questions. So hopefully, maybe this video will start you thinking about it, and you'll find some clever ways to improve this skill. Number 3 on our list, also very important, very related to the filtering thing, is pattern recognition, right? So the SAT is very predictable. This is why a lot of people kind of like are able to do these prediction videos of the SAT, myself included, is I know it's going to be on the test because it's the same topics over and over and over again. Now they're going to look different. And so for me, the real skill is, are you able to identify the topic? Can you specify the problem and understand why you're confused by something and understand what makes this question that looks totally new and unpredictable very similar to a lot of the other stuff that you've seen before, right? So it kind of gets back to that video games thing. You got to be able to choose the right tool for the situation. And as you do more questions, you can get better and better at recognizing the patterns that unify questions, even though on the surface they look very, very different. For some people, every SAT question is kind of like its own new adventure. And that's not good. It should start to feel pretty routine after a while. And so, one solution to that is maybe just to see more questions and do more practice. But I hesitate to recommend that because I've also seen people who have done thousands of SAT questions and still have no understanding of the patterns that work between them. So my basic advice here to improve the skill is stop taking practice tests, because practice tests are going to take a bunch of random things and kind of smush them together. And there aren't necessarily patterns within that practice test that you can pick up on. But if you look at a bunch of different questions about, say, like apostrophes, and you do it outside of a practice test where you're just looking at apostrophes questions, you'll start to notice the patterns in those questions that the SAT reuses again and again. And there are things that they do to make those things harder, to make the patterns harder to recognize. But if you can focus on a topic at a time, you're more likely to see the patterns that unify questions that otherwise look really, really different. So as a shameless plug here, if you are looking to practice this skill, I have my channel membership on YouTube. It's just $5 a month. And I do have packets of just like 10 apostrophes questions, 10 quadratics questions, and you can just do them, learn the patterns. I talk about the patterns a lot. It is a great way to practice. And so if you don't use my channel, find some other way to really target specific skills. You want to make sure you're building this skill before you start doing practice tests, because otherwise the practice test is just a jumble of questions of random topics. You got to find those patterns so that when you see a similar question on a practice test, you know exactly how to solve it. And that just gets us to number 2, one of my favorites. You have to have a good sense for traps, right? So here's the second half of a very famous saying: Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me, right? So the SAT is setting traps, and you can be mad at them for that. But the traps are fairly consistent. There's pattern recognition even in the traps. And so if you get fooled again and again and again by the same trap, whose fault is that? Is that the SAT's fault? I think it's your fault, right? They're going to offer that trap answer. They're going to offer you that really tempting thing that's wrong, but has a lot of tempting aspects to it. They're going to offer it to you. You know they're offering it to you. It's your choice whether you take it, right? So keep that in mind with the traps. A big problem here is people are very gullible. You see something that looks kind of good and you're going to grab onto it. You're not self-aware. You don't notice that you have a tendency to fall for these traps, that you have a tendency to be lured into these things. And some people never, ever develop this sense. In my opinion, it's the cause of most careless mistakes in the SAT. We think of a careless mistake as more like you lost a negative, you misread something. But honestly, most of the time, there was some clear indication, or just from pattern recognition and practice, you should have seen this trap coming and you weren't able to do it. So trap sense, pattern recognition, they kind of overlap. You've got to be able to recognize the patterns in your own thinking, your own behavior that lead you to make the same mistakes over and over and over again. The traps have patterns too. And that gets us to our number one thing here. And it's by far the most important skill that people ignore for the SAT. Number two, this trap sense thing, really important. But number one is so much more important, it's unbelievable. Number one skill that you need for the SAT, you need the ability to read and follow instructions. This is so important. It's unbelievable. People who don't do this can't get good scores. I know this seems trivial, but let's focus on this thing I put in yellow here. It's really important. I'm very proud of the way I put it. The SAT is definitely trying to trick you, but they will never lie to you, right? They're going to offer you those traps, but they're going to give you all the information you need to avoid them. Now, some of that information is directly in the question itself. Some of it is that information you pick up through practicing, through memorizing certain formulas and certain rules and things like that. But all the information is there. But a lot of people just do not have this skill of being able to read instructions. What they do is they assume instructions. They don't read instructions, they assume instructions. Let me give you a classic example of this. Very obvious kind of example where the SAT is going to punish you for not having this skill of reading instructions. In math, there are very often simple algebra questions where you know how to solve. You can solve algebraically, and you're going to solve and do all the little moves for algebra, and out pops the answer, x equals 5, right? Okay, and choice A is 5. Hey, that's the answer, done. But the question says, what is the value of x plus 1? Not what is the value of x, what is the value of x plus 1? And so, okay, 5 plus 1 is 6, and that's an answer, and that's the right answer. Now, why did they ask for x plus 1? Because they're testing your ability to read instructions. They know that you've answered thousands of algebra questions in school, and 997 of them have ended with solve for x. What is the value of x? They know you assume that that's the instruction you're always going to get, but it's right there. They're trying to trick you by asking for x plus 1, but they didn't lie to you. It says, what is the value of x plus 1? And yet some people cannot figure this out. Drives me nuts because it's so obvious. Just read what they say. And yet it's a skill that a lot of people don't really understand because this gets back to that confidence thing I talked about before. They're overconfident. They think they know better. They're smart, right? They get good grades in school. They're too smart. The instructions are beneath them. And so they make the same mistakes over and over again because they don't read. They assume they know what the question is asking instead of reading it. And this is obvious in math, but it's really just all over the SAT. They are definitely creating situations where they know lots of people will not read correctly. It's there in black and white, but they know people will make assumptions and not read what's there, and then they'll get questions wrong. So if you've made that mistake before, if that's you, this is easy to fix. Just read the instructions every single time. Now, there are things that they do to make this harder, right? They're going to sometimes include instructions that are maybe hard to follow. Maybe they involve words that you don't know or facts that you don't know. And so sometimes you can't follow the instructions because of a lack of knowledge. And that's where some of those other skills come in, right? You got to be memorizing things and get some strategies down to help you understand the instructions better. But I really want to stress this. They're not going to lie to you. Everything you need to solve those questions is in those questions. They're not telling you false information. It's all there. And yes, you do need some outside knowledge occasionally, but for the most of the careless mistakes you're falling into, it is probably that you did not read instructions and give them what they specifically asked for. I don't care if it's a math question, a passage question, a vocab question, in lots of different ways, there are instructions all over the SAT that if you just look for them and read them and follow them, the answers are pretty obvious. So hopefully that's a wake-up call. You do not want to get anything wrong because you didn't read the instructions. And one of the best ways to kind of learn the instructions on the SAT, of course, is my channel, the Settele Tutoring YouTube channel. I will take the time to read and decipher the instructions for you. So if you are not good at that skill, the place to start is here because I have lots of instructions on how to prep for the SAT. Definitely check out my SAT Strategy Series playlist. I give you lots of instructions on how to use the strategies correctly. And of course, this SAT study plan is great for just planning out your prep, no matter when you're starting to prep for your SAT. And if you're looking for those extra questions, the ones that I wrote, if you run out of resources from the College Board, go ahead and join my channel. Again, it's $5 a month. You can cancel anytime. And it's a great way to support the channel, but also to get some prep. In the meantime, you will get tons of questions that I've written, and they are targeted to specific things. And the instructions are clear. And I will always point out when you get something wrong because you did not follow the instructions. So let me know what you think about this. If you think I left something out, feel free to put in the comments. If you have noticed that you lack one of those skills, feel free to ask some questions. Maybe I can give you some advice on how to improve it. But I would say that the basic piece of advice is, like and subscribe to the channel, and you'll get lots of advice on how to improve those skills for your SAT, in addition to all the basic things like algebra and reading comprehension and grammar. Once again, I am Mike Settele. I hope this helped. Thank you so much for watching. And remember, when it comes to your scores, don't settle for less, settle for more.